4P360 Leadership. Find out, of course, more online at 4P360.com. And I'm Scott Conway, PhD, JD, the lead instructor for 4P360.com. Now, 4P360, of course, stands for 4-Pillar 360-degree leadership. We have the 4 pillars. We have 7 directions in our 360-degree leadership, not just the 3 conventional ones. But what we're going to be talking about today isn't the fundamentals of 4P360. We're going to be talking about 4P360 leadership, the rise from bottom to top. Because one of the great powers of 4P360 leadership is because it is a self-consistent leadership system that this allows you to teach it to people at the bottom of an organization, people who have 0 direct reports, people who have nobody underneath them that reports to them, people who have minimal or even no leadership sideways, and people who would have, of course, nobody at a diagonal down because there's no peers that also have direct reports either. And so talking about these people, so if you are going to teach 4P360 leadership down to your entry-level people, so they're right down at the very entry level of the organization, nobody reports to them, and if you were to teach these people 4P360 leadership, would it be useful to them? Well, of the 7 directions, 5 of the 7 directions apply to the person right at the bottom. So 4P360 leadership is powerful from bottom to top of an organization. So this entry-level person, because the nature of 4P360 leadership, we talk about leading down and we talk about leading diagonal down. And of course, leading down and diagonal down wouldn't apply to someone at the entry level with 0 direct reports. We talk about leading across, how they influence across. The simplest influence across is to be an example. To be able to be the example and explain the example they're being. And even if they're just the senior person, or even if they're just a 1 seminar more trained person than the other people in the organization, or even if they're equally trained but they have a particular knack or an aptitude for one particular part of the training, they can be an example leading across. Leading an upward diagonal, that is the boss of their peers or the peer of their boss, and of course leading up. So we take a look, well, they wouldn't have this downward direction, and they wouldn't have this diagonal direction, but they would still have 1, possibly 2, because depending upon how things work, if their peers have bosses or if their boss has a peer, there may or may not be a direction there. And of course, leading up to their direct supervisor. Now, in 4P360, we also have self-leadership and reverse leadership. So reverse leadership is how you help people influence you, and of course self-leadership is the decisions you make for yourself and your ability to get yourself to stick to those decisions. So of all of this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the directions apply, possibly not this one. So 4 to 5 of the directions apply to the bottom person. And so when you're taking a look at that, you go, okay, well, in which case I can see there would be some value to train the entire organization, including the brand new people in this. Well, then here gets to be another one of the great powers. Because all 4P360 training helps every team member prepare for their own leadership. It also helps them prepare for advancement. Not only does it help them prepare for advancement, if someone rises, there is no change in the principles of leadership. And so if these people continue to gain experience and say, you know, as they work their way up, we'll say that over the course of time, new people come in underneath, and all of these people eventually move up to at least a shift supervisor or a team leader position. Nothing needs to change. Just as they take it up 1 step now, all that's happened is now they just have a direct report. And possibly now the downward diagonal. Now all of a sudden they're using all 7 directions. So if someone rises, there is no change in the leadership positions. Starting with leading up with a leader that does reverse leadership. If they do reverse leadership well, the mentoring has begun. And so then you can be mentoring the leader. So when you have someone who's looking for someone to promote up to the shift supervisor, because they're doing the upward leadership, they're leading up, and this person is doing the reverse leadership, not only leading down, but also helping the person learn how to lead up. Part of what is included in leading up is taking things off of your leader's plate. In order to take things off of your leader's plate, you have to be able to make leadership level decisions. So say, for instance, I'm going to use one of the most powerful illustrations that I personally know. And this is General Norman Schwarzkopf, back when he was a colonel, was put in charge of a logistics base. Now, Stormin' Norman was a colonel at that time with zero experience running a logistics base. There was a captain on that base that probably knew more about running the base than anyone else on the base. So Norman Schwarzkopf did reverse leadership with this captain, came to the captain and explained to the captain, this is what I want from you. When there's an issue, when there's a challenge, if I'm aware of it, I'll bring it to you. If you're aware of it, you bring it to me. So reverse leadership and leading down is both going on here. Also told the captain, since you know more about this than I do, I want your analysis of the situation. I want 3 recommendations of 3 different ways to solve the problem. And I want your suggestion as to which of those 3 ways we should implement and why. And so Norman Schwarzkopf, assuming command of this base, is teaching this captain how to lead up. And so for Norman, that is reverse leadership. I am teaching you how to lead me. And so this captain is learning how to lead up and comes to the colonel with his analysis of the problem, with his proposed solutions, and with the one he thinks that they should implement and why. And General Schwarzkopf said that most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time he went with the captain's suggestion because the captain really didn't know what they were doing. From time to time, though, he wanted more information. That he wasn't comfortable with the facts that were available, he wasn't comfortable with the analysis of the problem, or he wasn't comfortable enough with the why of the solution. And so he would send the captain back for more information. It's like, I want to know more about this before I agree with the decision. And the captain, of course, would then go get more information because he is the captain, and Norman Schwarzkopf at the time was the colonel. And as this dynamic was playing out, of course, General Schwarzkopf is learning how to run a logistics base. So even though when he came in, he did not have the particular experience, the special training necessary to do this, he was learning the job. He was understanding some of the dynamics and some of the ideas, making the best decisions he could, largely going off of a multiple choice provided to him by the captain. Now what the captain is doing is the captain is leading up. So that General Schwarzkopf doesn't have to go out and gather all the information himself, the captain gathers the information. So that Norman Schwarzkopf doesn't have to do his analysis of the problem all by himself, the captain does the analysis. So that Norman Schwarzkopf doesn't have to develop potential solutions all by himself, the captain develops potential solutions. And so that Norman Schwarzkopf doesn't have to necessarily make that choice, the captain begins with his recommendation. And most of the time, not all of the time, the leader, Norman Schwarzkopf, went with the suggestion of the junior person. Not all the time, because of course the buck stops with Schwarzkopf. The buck doesn't stop with the captain, the buck stops with the colonel. And so the colonel has to be comfortable the colonel is making the right decision. And that's an example of leading up with Norman Schwarzkopf doing an excellent job of leading down. And of course that captain developed a great reputation for someone who is a great leader leading up. So then if you are looking for someone to promote, who are you going to promote? Doesn't that captain sound like he's acquitted himself well and has demonstrated that he is ready to be a major? And if he was already a major, he would have already demonstrated he's ready to be a lieutenant colonel. And for that matter, even if he was a lieutenant colonel already, he has been demonstrating he is ready to be a colonel. By the way he leads up, by the way he has gathered the information that a colonel needs, by the way he has done the analysis a colonel needs to have, by the way he has developed the possible solutions a colonel needs to have, and by the way he has evaluated a reason why one of them might be more ideal than the others, the way a colonel needs to think, that captain has been demonstrating he is ready for advancement. So the entry-level team member with 0 direct reports is already learning and already practicing leadership that will be used at every level. Now in this particular case, the man in that example was a captain, and so he has other people under his authority. But even if you're dealing with a direct report who has no direct reports themselves, they're using up to 5 of the 7 directions. Because they're using up to 5 of the 7 directions, even with 0 direct reports, when it comes time to step up, you will see how well this person already does self-leadership. You will see how this person already does reverse leadership. You will see how this person leads up. You will see how this person leads across or sideways. You will see possibly how this person leads an upward diagonal. You will see 5 of the directions. The self-reverse, up, diagonal up, and of course the sideways. So the 4P360 system will then help decision makers choose who to promote, because you will get to see this in action in 5 of the 7 directions at this bottommost level with 0 direct reports. Since all 4 pillars and 5 of the directions are practiced at the bottom, decision makers get to see how well the team member is doing in those directions. And advancement just adds the last 2 directions. And so if you're taking a look at this person, you elevate them up and elevate them up and elevate them up. All that's happening as they come up to the higher level is now they still have up, they still have perhaps an upward diagonal, they still have sideways, and you're just adding the downward and the downward diagonal. And of course the self-leadership remains the same, the reverse leadership remains the same. And you got an opportunity to watch them in action. You get to see how well they do at these levels. Now, as the 4P360 leader gains more experience, that more experience helps them do a better job. And as they continue to advance, they continue to rise, they simply become what we call the rising leader. The rising leader, once they stepped up a level or perhaps 2 levels, now they're doing all 7 directions, and of course all the time they're doing all 4 pillars. So the rising leader applies more challenging 4P360 leader, because the kind of decisions you're going to have to make down here at the entry level probably aren't going to be as difficult, challenging, sophisticated, meaningful, or impactful to the business as the leader a level or 2 up. And as you do this, just as much of leadership is a judgment call. I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges of leadership in general, is there's a whole bunch of leadership that's a judgment call. The more obvious a decision is, the less likely that decision is going to come to the leader. The more difficult the decision is, the more those decisions tend to rise up. The more impactful those decisions are, the more costly they could be. The more money they could make if they're a great decision, the more money they could lose if they're a bad decision. The more positive impact they could have if it's a great decision, the more negative impact it could have if it's a bad decision, continues to increase as you rise up in leadership. So you get more challenging leadership decisions, more challenging judgment calls where now you're relying on your experience. Increasingly difficult decisions with greater impact are practiced as the leader rises. And the rising leader always has the 4-pillar filter and the 7-direction check to use on every single decision that that leader makes. And because you have the 4-pillar filter and you have the 7-direction check to use as a guide, because you don't have to learn new leadership techniques, you don't have to learn new leadership things, that part stays the same. You already have the foundation upon which you are building. And so when you're trying to make that higher level decision, you filter it through. It's like, okay, would this be a good decision for myself? Is this something I would teach others to do with me, for me, or through me? Is this maybe a down version that has an up version, and maybe a sideways version, the diagonal versions that I think would be good decisions? By applying all 7 directions as a check to see, is this a good leadership tool for me to use? Is this a good way for me to work out this decision if I look at it in all 7 directions? And then how does it do on the filters? Is it powerful? Will it actually work? Is it practical? Is there a use for it that works in the directions? Is there a use for it that won't cause collateral damage, that isn't going to solve the immediate problem, but it's going to have unintended consequences later? Is it principled? What principles am I using? So the same thing could be adjusted and adapted to other unique situations. And of course, is it positive? Is it focused on where we're trying to go, or is it focused on what we're trying to get away from? Is it focused on creating something, or is it focused on destroying or eliminating something? Is it building connection, or is it destroying connection? Is it building reputation, or is it damaging reputation? And so as you have these 4 pillars to always be your filter, and then you have these 7 directions to use as your check, It allows a rising leader to do increasingly challenging leadership decisions, and they have a starting point. They have a foundation upon which they can work as they continue to rise up in leadership, and the decisions they have to make get more difficult. The rising leader also applies more subtle 4P360 leadership. So as the leader continues to rise, through the insight of experience with 4P360, the 4P360 leader, using, of course, the 4 pillars and the 7 directions as a foundation, this allows mastery of tools and techniques. And because it doesn't keep changing, there isn't a different kind of leadership one level up than there was on the bottom. There isn't a different kind of leadership, now that you're in a management position. There's not a different kind of leadership now that you're running a region or a division or a department. There's not now a different kind of leadership now that you're doing higher level executive leadership. That it stays the same, and because of that, you can continue to develop mastery. And as you develop mastery, you can be more subtle about it. This allows mastery of tools and techniques by applying the 4 and 7 in more intriguing, in more predictive, in wiser, and more insightful ways. Now, what I mean by intriguing is things that catch your imagination. Because they have experience, because they're using the same tools all the time, they begin to develop an understanding and insight that allows them to take note of things that you might not otherwise notice if you keep learning new things. That even if you continue to increase your toolbox, even if your 7-direction check keeps tweaking and adjusting maybe new tools, because you're always using the same filters, because you're always using the same 7-direction checks, you begin to master these tools, master the application, and because of this mastery, it allows you to perform better and better, more subtle levels, be able to notice things that other people might not notice because you have master level understanding and insight due to ongoing experience with these tools. It also allows you to be more predictive because now you have experience, and because you've been using exactly the same tools, that mastery helps you predict outcomes because now you have experience using these tools. You see what tends to work with what kind of people, what needs to be tweaked a little bit, upgraded or adjusted or backed off a little bit depending upon the individuals you're dealing with. And as you get to higher and higher level leadership, leadership is more and more about individuals than it is about policies. And that's one of the biggest challenges we have sometimes with what we call leadership systems. Really what they are is management systems. And management systems focus on the system, they focus on a process or a procedure, they do not focus on the person. And as you work your way up in leadership, it is more and more about the people. That the people have the skills. Now you still need procedures and you still need techniques and processes for people to follow. But when you're having individual leadership challenges, very often those are very individual. And as you have more experience, it becomes more predictive. It becomes wiser and more insightful. As the rising leader continues to rise, the rising leader can use increasingly sophisticated 4P360 leadership. 4P360 leadership, because of its 4 filters, because of its 7 directions, has a level of sophistication that can be absolutely amazing to people. And you are building on the exact foundation already learned at the bottom. As the 4P360 leadership or leader gains more experience, the leader learns to naturally think, to automatically think in terms of the 4 pillars. Because then that just becomes automatic. To automatically think in terms of the 4 or 7 directions. So 4 pillars and 7 directions become an automatic way of thinking. And so the 4P360 leader, as they get more sophisticated, as this goes on autopilot more, doesn't have to keep stopping to think about these things. The 4P360 leader learns naturally to run it through the 7-direction filter. And they begin to do this automatically. As the 4P360 leader gains more experience, and they naturally think in these terms, to think through the short term and the long term, to take more factors into account naturally, and because of their experience to be able to do it intuitively. That's so ingrained into them subconsciously that this is just the way they think. And this is the way they think on the fly. And as they think through the short and the long term, as they take more factors into account, as this becomes their hunches, their intuition because of their experience with it, that leads to increasingly better decision making. Because the criteria for making decisions, the 4 filters, the 7 directions, doesn't keep changing on them as they continue to work their way up. Now, some of this applies even just in something as clear as dollars and cents. So there was a executive VP of a company, he was number 2 man in the company, and a matter came to his attention. Now, this is a 22-nation, multinational conglomerate, so they have offices and business in 22 different countries, so this is a big deal. So if this comes to the number 2 person in a company of this size, that's pretty significant. The problem itself was pretty simple and straightforward. The problem was the accounting division had made a mistake. They were taking too much money out of people's paychecks. And some of the people who were having too much money taken out of their paychecks had worked their way up the chain of command trying to get it handled. They had talked to the accounting department, and the accounting department's attitude was basically like, well, you know, that's a lot of work to do. You'll get it back at the end of the year anyway when you do your taxes. You know, no harm, no foul. Ultimately, this lands on the executive VP's desk. The executive VP does 2 things. Number 1, he flies in one of the women who is particularly struggling. She's a single mother. She has a pretty decent-sized paycheck, and because of the size of her paycheck, this mistake that the accounting division is making is taking hundreds of dollars a month out of her paycheck. She needs this money. She has kids that need things done, and she can't be waiting to get her money a year from now when she does her taxes. She needs the money as she goes. And she did her paperwork. Well, this woman was sitting out in the office when the executive calls the head of the accounting division in and basically tells the head of the accounting division, who makes the exact same, he says, they'll get it back. You know, it's nothing to worry about. It's not like anyone's actually losing any money. And the executive VP says, well, tell you what, I've got this woman sitting outside, explained her situation. I'm going to call her in here, and you can explain to her why you don't think it's a big deal that she doesn't have the money to pay for her kids' braces. You can explain to her why you don't think it's a big deal that she doesn't have the money to pay for her kids' school tuition. You can explain to her why you don't think it's a big deal that she can pay her bills every month because she's going to get the money back at the end of next year. And after you make that explanation to her, if she's happy with the explanation and if she agrees that, yes, that is a great way to do things, fine, we'll leave it exactly the way it is. But if she's not satisfied and I'm not satisfied and you don't fix it, we might have to make some changes around here. Now, this leader was doing the 4P360 system. He's leading down in this particular case. He's thinking comprehensively, and he's got a head of his accounting division that will not respond to positive leadership, that will not respond to policy and procedure, who is making excuses. And so then, you still follow the thing, okay, it has to be powerful, has to be practical, has to be principled, and has to be positive. Well, he did positive as far as he could do positive. Now, he didn't threaten the guy initially. He tried to just get a hold of him and say, there's a situation going on, please take care of it. And he refused to take care of it. And so as it escalated more, even in this situation, though, look how the relationship is still being built. If you really honestly believe this stuff you're telling me, I'm going to give you a chance to make that pitch. And I would give you a chance to make that pitch to somebody who is being affected by your decision. If you convince that person, if your pitch on this situation is good enough that she's convinced and you can convince me, fine. We'll leave it exactly the way it is. And you're the head of accounting. It's your call. And if it's not going to be that big of an issue, it's not going to be that big of an issue. That's perfectly okay with me. But if you're going to come to me with all of these excuses, if you're giving yourself permission to take money out of people's paycheck, send it off to the IRS, and then they're going to have to get it back next year in March or April when they do their taxes, you're going to have to sell that idea to the people who are affected by that idea. I'll give you your shot. Do you want your shot? And then what ended up happening is this person decided, okay, well, making that presentation to an actual human being who is actually affected by this really isn't something he wants to do. He had never thought about the human element. All he had thought about is how much paperwork it was going to be for him and his department. And he just didn't want to do it. And he was learning that human element, that we have people here. They're not just entries on the ledger, they're human beings. And I am going to teach you how to think about them as human beings. Not how to think about them as paychecks, but as people. And to think of them that way. And this accounting head learned the lesson. All of a sudden now, all of the employees in this 22-nation conglomerate are human beings to him, because he came face to face with one of them. And in his case, he made his boss make it a shove in that direction. And yet, his boss still built that relationship, gave him a chance. Like, if you really believe the stuff you're telling me, if you really believe you're being reasonable, I'll give you your shot. And if you can sell it, then we're good. And he realized that he really didn't have an excuse, and he wasn't going to make that presentation. Instead, he made an apology. He apologized to the woman, said he would take care of it, apologized to his boss, said he would take care of it, and then guess what happened? He took care of it. And from then on, he's thinking of these people as people. Now, when the leader is high up on top, the leader has been mastering 4P360 from the very beginning. So if someone spends 10 years, 20 years, however many years it takes to get from the bottom to the top, they will have mastered this. They will have been mastering 4P360 from the very bottom. Every single step that they've taken, however many layers the organization has. So in the very bottom, you got to see, of the 7 directions, 5 of them. Then you started to get to see 7 of them at that level. And you got to see all 7 of them going on at this level. And as the problems get more challenging, as the application gets more sophisticated and more subtle, as they work their way up to the top, you see, when you're considering them for a high position, how have they been doing? They've been mastering this from the very beginning, from the first leadership training they had as an entry-level person with no direct reports. They've gone from beginner to expert to master. And like a master of martial arts, a 4P360 leadership master continues to improve with a clear compass heading, because they know which way they're going. They continue to improve. It gives them a direction to go, and they know what great leadership looks like, and they've gotten to practice it as they continue to lead now in the downward directions. As they eventually get to the level where maybe they no longer have peers, maybe they no longer have bosses of their peers or peers of their boss, and they may no longer have a boss. But because they've been using 4P360 the entire time, they have mastered it, just like earning a black belt and continuing on to master level ranks. So that's 4P360 from the bottom to the top, to train rising leaders and to train leaders to be able to rise, and give you a system to evaluate them. Give them a way to know how they're winning, and for you to know how well they're leading from the very beginning all the way up to the top. That's 4P360 leadership, the rise from the bottom to the top, and how to train the rising leader. I'm Scott Conway, PhD, JD. Thank you very much.